Fred es el director del índice de libertad económica del Fraser Institute de Canadá. Nos está acompañando esta semana durante las mesas de trabajo para sacar recomendaciones que se le entregarán al gobierno nacional. Fred, nuevamente gracias por venir a Colombia y estar con nosotros. Y bueno, tengo una serie de preguntas que surgen de algunas de las mesas y de los temas más controversiales que se han tocado en algunas de las mesas de trabajo. ¿Por qué consideras que el capitalismo tiene tan mala fama en Colombia? A pesar de que la libertad económica, el libre mercado, ha sacado a millones de personas de la pobreza, y la experiencia internacional pues apunta a que es el mejor modelo y es la ruta a seguir para el progreso.
Well, first off, let me thank you for inviting me here. It is marvelous to see the great work ICP and you are doing to create a better future for the people of Colombia. You're right, the benefits are obvious. Anyone can look around the world and see that the nations that are prosperous have low levels of poverty, high levels of education, that all these nations are free market nations. It's as if people build brick by brick a wall in their minds that separates what they want to believe of the world and what they know of the world. But yes, you're also right. There are reasons why people are suspicious of free markets. And it's not actually free markets they're suspicious of. They're suspicious of crony capitalists, which hate free markets. They hate free markets as much as the socialists. They want their greed, they want their enterprise or company to control the market. They don't want you to have choice. They don't want you to be able to buy a foreign product that might compete with them. They especially don't want you to start up a business that might compete with them. So they lobby government, they make complicated regulations, they make it difficult for people to bring in goods to give you choice. They make it difficult for you to make goods and compete with them to give other people choice. You know, in the end, not only are they making you poorer by not having choice, by not being able to start a business, but they're making themselves poorer. The only way that you can be a great, successful international business is with competition. If you don't allow competition in, your own skills are not honed. And lots of people will say, well, it's only national companies that we're interested in. But great and prosperous economies have to have international companies, have to trade with the world to become prosperous like that. What would Finland be without Nokia? What would the United States be without great companies like IBM? So it is tremendously important to open the barriers, to give people free choice. You know, freedom should be an intrinsic right, even if it doesn't provide benefits, but it provides huge benefits. So I think the greed of crony capitalists is one thing people point to try to ignore the massive evidence of the benefits economic freedom creates.
Fred, la legislación laboral colombiana pone énfasis, pone el foco en la protección al trabajador, en garantizar un salario mínimo y en brindarle todos los elementos de la protección social. Pero la legislación no está en lo más mínimo enfocada en la creación de empleo. ¿Por qué consideras que esto es así? ¿Y cómo crees que se puede mejorar esta situación para generar pues la creación de mayor número de empleos?
You know, one of the great ironies of labor market regulations is the people who call for more and more stringent labor market regulations claim they're helping the poor and the disadvantaged. In fact, what they're doing is keeping the poor and the disadvantaged and the poorly educated out of the labor market. Roughly 80% of Colombia's labor force is in the informal market, and they can't get into the formal market. What these labor laws do is they enforce class privilege. They enforce the class privilege the 20% of workers that are in the formal economy and keep the 80% that are in the informal economy poor and uneducated and hard to support their families. Let me just give you a couple examples. If you make it onerously expensive to hire someone, the last person you're going to hire is somebody who's poor and uneducated and unskilled, because those costs are just huge compared to what that person can produce. Or if you make it difficult to fire somebody, you're never going to hire a poor and unskilled person, because if things get difficult for your business, if the person doesn't work out, if there's an economic recession, you have to keep paying them, even driving yourself potentially into poverty. So these things create a huge barrier for the poor and uneducated. And here's perhaps the most important thing. The best training, the best experience, the best education for somebody who's poor is getting a job, learning work skills. Once somebody gets their first job in the formal economy, they become more and more valuable. They learn more and more skills. They move up the income scale. Poverty actually is reduced, and there's a lot of evidence of this. It's rather like what we were discussing before, when despite the benefits of free market economies, which are obvious, people somehow say, no, free market economies are bad. And similarly with this, the way stringent labor market regulation excludes the poor and the uneducated is obvious, and yet the proponents say we're doing it for the poor and the uneducated. So another case where reality clashes with what people are claiming.
¿Cuál consideras que puede ser el papel de los centros de pensamiento, de los think tanks, para mejorar en el ranking del índice de libertad económica del Fraser Institute?
Think tanks are tremendously important. They do key research on what makes people better off. And perhaps even more importantly, they educate the public and the policymakers. You cannot have stable reform if the public doesn't understand it and if the policymakers don't understand it. Think tanks played a key role. This may be dating myself, but some people may remember the global economic funk of the 1970s. Soaring inflation, high unemployment, weak economic growth. Well, think tanks in Canada, the United States, and Europe presented new economic plans, which led to an economic resurgence in Europe, the United States, and Asia. And the Fraser Institute had a very influential role in Canada. We had elected in the early 1990s a prime minister who was from the left wing of a left-wing party. But the benefits of economic freedom, of free markets, so powerfully impressed themselves on him that he actually, though I don't think he'd ever admit it, basically adopted the whole Fraser Institute policy thing. He dramatically cut government spending. And remember, his orientation is left-wing, but he knew what benefited the people. He cut government spending more than Reagan or Thatcher did. He reduced taxes. And made the regulations more business-friendly, more open to economic freedom. Basically, the Fraser Institute playbook. And by the way, it resulted in an economic miracle. There were dire predictions. Canada was going to hit the wall, go bankrupt. Our deficit and debt was soaring. When Prime Minister Chrétien dramatically cut spending and reduced taxes, the Canadian economy took off like a rocket. He is, I think, the only Prime Minister since the Second World War who was elected to 3 majorities. Not just 3 governments, but 3 majority governments, and the Canadian economy hummed along ever since. So I think we can take pride in what we're doing in Canada. I think we've help Canada, the Canadian economy produce jobs, lower poverty, increase prosperity. And you should be so proud of what you're doing and ICP is doing here in Colombia. It's marvelous and so important for the future of the people of Colombia.
Muchas gracias, Fred. Con lo que acabas de decir, de hecho me afirmo más porque me siento muy contenta en que las líneas de acción del instituto sean la formación, la difusión y la incidencia en la opinión pública y en los diferentes espacios de la vida pública. Creo que entonces pues lo estamos haciendo en la vía, en el camino correcto para promover las libertades económicas, esperando que eso pueda tener algún efecto positivo o marcando las hojas de ruta para el gobierno colombiano, para la senda del progreso. Muchas gracias.